Hello, everyone. So for the Startup Ecosystem Trends in 2021 panel, I'll be joined by Alain Bindels, who's Head of Innovation Facilitation and Digitalization at Roche, Simon Hardie, CEO at Findexable, and Andrew Berkowitz, the Managing Partner at Zwile Media. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Hi,
Hello.
Josh. Thanks for having us.
Lisbon always wins polls like that. You gotta let someone else have a chance.
So guys, so we're here to discuss startup ecosystem trends in 2021. So the first question I would like to ask you guys, with the experience that you have, in which industries this year do you think we will see major disruption, and which technologies do you think will be the catalyst? And I think first we'll go to maybe Alain to first talk about that and your opinion.
Yeah, of course. I mean, due to Covid-19, there has been a huge shift in the way we are working, right? So more the remote working industry has picked up quite a lot. And connected to that is also, online education, right? So more like the e-learning and electronic education systems that are linked to this. I mean, all the, universities had to fully go online and virtual. So I think a lot of online education we will see. Another part, of course, in healthcare. So I'm coming, of course, from the healthcare. We also saw a big change in more like telehealth. So more, patients cannot necessarily go to the doctor, or they're afraid to go to the doctor. So having more telehealth solutions to connect with the healthcare system. Another part is in drug development as well. So as in drug development in healthcare, usually we have like a lot of clinical trials, but because of the situation with COVID, we had to shift our clinical trials to become more virtual and remote clinical trials. I think that will be a big shift. And because of the technologies, this will also be easier, right, this year to actually do more remote clinical trials. And of course, everything that has to do with e-commerce and delivery, right? I mean, most companies, they have to rely on, contactless delivery because of COVID. And they have to shift their business model to more online shopping or e-commerce. So I think we will see more and more trends in the e-commerce space as well.
Yeah, Simon, as someone who works in fintech specifically as well, what trends do you notice, and which also correlate with what Alain just mentioned?
Yeah, thanks, Josh, and thanks, Alain. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we from our side, we come from we're a fintech focused data business. Within, therefore, I wouldn't necessarily be able to comment on sectors as a whole, but what I can say ultimately is that, this combination of digital acceleration, continued lockdown, is driving, the financialization of everything. And I think, back to Alain's point about healthcare, what you're going to start, what we're already seeing is, in all spheres, in all parts of the world, is a growing sort of understanding that financial services doesn't necessarily have to be the focus of a company, but it's definitely it's an incredibly important component of any company going forward. So the whole idea of what we would call embedded finance, the kind of Uber model, where Uber is a transportation company, but actually it's a payments company. We're going to see more and more of that, and I think you're going to see that proliferating in the most remote regions of the world, possibly even the more remote regions of the world, driving that innovation and driving that disruption. The other two kind of key components here are sort of regulation, not purely from the kind of political government end of things, but the technology of regulation. Digital is accelerating the number of transactions. It's also, of course, accelerating the number of transactions that are fraudulent or even criminal. And so technology that enables companies to transact securely, identify their customers, know who they are transacting with, and then report that to the regulatory authorities. We're seeing already a massive uptick in that over the last few months. And that obviously plays into sort of infrastructure broadly, digital infrastructure, whether you're a bank or a retailer or indeed in any other industry. But banks in particular are so susceptible to this because they run on old technologies. Any incumbent industry is having to think very carefully about its technology infrastructure and how it transacts, how it does business digitally, and in many cases, for many industries that are not digital first, that are having to work with legacy, we will see. Certainly within financial services, but in other industries, you will see a kind of massive move towards innovation or companies that enable digital infrastructure that possibly work with existing systems. And then the final thing, which will get a lot of airtime during the year, as if it hasn't already, is not so much Bitcoin, but cryptocurrencies in general. We will see normalization. I'm no forecaster. I'm bound to be wrong on Bitcoin, but there's certainly every chance that Bitcoin becomes a fully regulated thing. And even if it doesn't, every major serious central bank is now looking extremely seriously at central bank digital currencies. So kind of the normalization of digital currencies, particularly in a world where trade patterns are retrenching, there's a move away from globalization. There is going to be a very interesting opportunity for any central bank that's first to market with a fully tradable, fully international digital currency, and so I think ultimately all of those things sort of boil down to what you might call during this year the kind of realization of what the internet of money really means, and I think that's where we will see we will as consumers, not just as business people, we will start to understand fully that money really is no longer a metal coin or a piece of paper.
Yeah. And in terms of your opinion on that, Andrew, I know you're nodding your head. Simon mentioned that Bitcoin will be taking over this year. So let's hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I mentioned in the last quarter summit that this is going to be a crazy year for cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin. And like Simon said, it's not a matter of being a prophet. It's more just, it's followed the same exact kind of boom and bust cycle since it started about a decade ago. And we're kind of in this next phase where a lot of the things that were getting hyped in the last bull run of 2017, 2018 are now actually built. And so we're now just ready to enter into that next phase. And there's this kind of mature decentralized finance ecosystem that's being built on top of platforms like Ethereum and Stellar that provides loan services, market making, derivatives, all sorts of kind of centralized services that are now built within these protocols. So 2021 is going to be a super crazy year, especially once China fully rolls out their central bank digital currency, and it's probably going to be fantastic, honestly. But I would say the other key thing to look out for this year specifically, in my mind, is the creator economy. I know a lot of us on this call and just in this space are super focused in and dialed in on, VC, Silicon Valley, high growth tech companies. But that's not necessarily the answer for every single economy. The new kind of creator economy that's emerging as a result of COVID, because everybody's now in front of their laptop and actually engage with it, being a podcaster, being, a content creator wasn't necessarily a viable, it's hard to land a business model to that, even if you have kind of a niche, highly engaged audience. From maybe 2015 up until last year, it was really tough for the quote unquote middle class of the creator economy to actually make a livable wage. But now that's kind of changing, and what we talked about, or what we've been talking about for a couple of decades now with Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fans thesis is finally here. You can make a six-figure income on 1,000 fans. And there's all sorts of platforms now that are emerging, Mighty Networks, Circle, whatever that may be, that allows you to kind of put out a podcast, put out a blog, get 1,000 fans, get them into a private community, and actually make a living off that, about what you're passionate about. And so I think the creator economy is going to be the biggest thing over the next couple of years for most people, because this kind of VC-backed startup game is for a very small number of people. It takes a very specific temperament to be able to run one of those type of companies. So I would really think about, as ecosystem builders, how can we support the creator economy, the freelancer economy, and kind of the maybe more practical, down the earth ways to create jobs this decade.
Yeah, and to put that question onto Alain, actually, how, in your opinion, how can we support the creator economy and help build the jobs over the next decade?
Yeah, no, I really like what you're saying, Andrew. I think it's definitely true that there's more opportunities, right, for people in this whole new way of working to create content, to create maybe online businesses, and start creating new value. I mean, one of the things, for example, that we are also looking at is to support, for example, like patient entrepreneurs, right? So these are like really individuals that have an idea about their health, and of course they have a disease, right? So they know best like what they need, and actually rather of we inventing something for them, actually asking the patient entrepreneur, like, what do you need? What do you really see that is helping you? So it's actually turning it around, right? So more from the entrepreneurship side, from a patient or an individual. So I think this is a great thing, maybe to also look for that's going to happen. I mean, for me, I also see that, due to COVID-19, of course, maybe it's also easier to connect globally or regionally. So I think one of the challenges, of course, is everything is virtual and you cannot go to conferences and, face-to-face gatherings, but it's much easier maybe to connect with different countries or even people in completely different regions. So also for startups or entrepreneurs, I think it's easier maybe to connect to the global ecosystem and not only focus on their local ecosystem where they're working, where they meet the people. So I think there's a huge opportunity because of this whole virtual working, to connect much more globally with investors, with people that have a similar interest or mindset. So I think that's will definitely help what Andrew was saying, right? That you really can create new business models and even new companies out of this.
Yeah, and like further to that, you touched slightly on the fact that COVID is going to change the way we look in terms of ecosystems and looking at ecosystems by region. But in terms of looking at different locations and regions in the world, where do you guys think that particular regions will grow substantially over the next year? And I'd like to bring the question first to Andrew, because I know you've done a bit of a podcast series on the Arab world. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. My answer was going to be basically, the Gulf region, UAE, Israel, because of the economic normalization that's happening between Israel, Bahrain, Morocco, UAE. Markets are certainly open up. Middle East, most of the world besides the US and China face the problem of market fragmentation. I think it's a little bit easier now in this decade, specifically in the Arab world, just because cultures are more similar than they are between Europe or Africa. And so I think with the economic normalization, Israel becomes a place where there's still a good amount of VC, there's still a lot of innovation coming out of there, but then the market size is just so small that they typically will build the MVP and then launch in the US, launch in Europe, launch in Canada. Whereas now they kind of, this cross-regional Levant to Gulf region is opening up. So I think you're going to see more and more companies that start in Israel, but then start to scale to UAE, use that as a hub into the rest of the Arab world, maybe as a hub into Asia as well. For me, I have considered uprooting to UAE. The problem is time zone differences. It's tough for me to interface with West Coast US while being based in Dubai. I think it's 12 hours ahead. But Dubai, UAE, and probably Saudi Arabia too. It's gonna be a really, really big couple of years for them.
Yeah, in terms of for you, Simon, in regard to that, and especially you guys at Findexable, you've done the fintech rankings recently.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to hear about some of the lessons you've learned based on that, and also comparing that to what Andrew mentioned in terms of development in the Arab world and the UAE.
Yeah, well, I think you have to follow the numbers when it comes to financial services activity. The thing of fintech is that it sort of lowers the cost to serve, so the ability to to serve more customers, to get, to improve access to financial services. Well, the Arab world has one of the lowest rates of financial inclusion globally. It also has a high birth rate, and one can attribute that also to Africa as a whole. A very high birth rate. Within 20 years, I think Nigeria will give birth to sort of possibly. I think it's half of all babies will be born in Africa, I think within 20 years or something crazy like that. So I think you're going to see these I think certainly those two regions. You've also got the regional common economic partnerships, as well as the Africa Free Trade Agreement signed in the last 12 months. So we're going to start to see a lot more regional integration in Africa, Southeast Asia. So there are going to be opportunities. Southeast Asia as a fintech marketplace already. Presumably that's going to, we're going to see a lot more exciting things happening over there. And I think this whole concept that you were talking a minute ago about enabling the creator economy. Well, I think ultimately that comes down to access to finance. And the problem with the VC market is that it's very much an analog marketplace still. And actually, our focus, what we want to do is really to digitize access to opportunities, to make it easier to find these companies, for the companies to be able to promote themselves better, and therefore for the investors to be able to analyze these companies so that you can see, you can more easily compare a company in one location, no matter where it might be, with a peer in a totally different location. And that's really what's needed if you want to enable drive the digital creator independent economy. That can only happen by digitizing access to finance, and relating to what some of the people are asking on the chat. It also implies improving the data quality around these firms. So yeah, there are some sort of fascinating sort of things to happen, and certainly emerging markets are the place to be for this. Providing one can get more data on the firms and find these firms in these locations.
And for you, Alain, in terms of your interest in regional areas and what's currently working for you guys at Roche, and ecosystems that are under your interest at the moment, could you expand on that?
Yeah, so I think for us also more the emerging markets, right? Like, Africa was being mentioned, or Asia, of course, very important. We're heavily investing also in expanding in China and building up more workforces there. So I would say, of course, Asia, of course, is very critical for us. But I think also if I'm looking at, for example, Africa or other Asian countries, it's easier maybe to experiment, certain like new technologies. For example, new supply chain. We're doing some experiments with supply chain and also, tracking of health or collecting healthcare data. And this is much easier, outside of Europe or US, because we have so many regulations in Europe and US to actually do that, right? It's very difficult to try out these new models in those countries.
Yeah.
So I think definitely like Africa, Asia, we're definitely investing a lot, or also trying out like new technologies in those countries. That said, one of the big things for us is really to have a different digital customer experience, right? So I think somebody was asking about AI and these kind of things. So we're really trying to create like a new interface, with doctors or with patients. And of course, we have been speaking about this for many years, but I think this year we will see more and more tangible examples, like really digital platforms for doctors, for patients, where they can really, for example, do the diagnosis for the oncologist, for example, so really have the access to the diagnostic information and even have access to information about our drugs, etc. Or even more collecting data from patients, because we have to do more remote clinical trials. So we have to also have those tools that go with this. And I think in the past we were maybe exploring it, but there was less maybe an urgency, whereas now because of COVID-19, we have this urgency that we need to roll out these solutions faster. So yeah, I think this digital customer experience, that's going to be a very big thing also for healthcare.
Yeah.
Yeah, Simon, you were nodding and agreeing on. And do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the AI one is, data. Someone's asked what's next for AI and big data. Well, I think Alain, you explained it, especially when it comes to healthcare. Data is everything, and we're certainly seeing that with the pandemic. Anyway, from our side, financial services. Well, it's only going to you're only going to be able to improve access to financial services if the data gets better, and improve access for those companies to succeed in the first place if, again, the data gets better. And when it comes to AI, certainly within most industries, and certainly within financial services, yes, AI is going to be, it's very important. But I think one can look at it from two sides. On the one hand, the only way that you can succeed with AI is thinking very carefully about the business model in the first place. What is the blend between human and robot, man and machine, woman and machine within a company? What is the problem that's being solved? And then, of course, you have to think, and this does play into the data argument as well. You've also got to think that regulators are starting to look very carefully at deployment of automated technology, because they want to be sure that firms are clear on the way the decisions are being taken. So, for example, the great thing about new algorithms is that there are companies based in Israel, based in other places, that are coming up with new algorithms to make it easier for people to get access to finance, to borrow money. Well, that's a great thing on the one hand, but on the other, what is the decisioning that goes behind that? How much human intervention is there to ensure that the stuff is being money is being lent on sound principles, or that it's being lent fairly, or that it's not, or that justification isn't being made to get people into debt that much more quickly. And of course, if companies are working in emerging regions where there's a greater proportion of the populations living in poverty, that becomes a really fundamental human issue. So yes, big data is absolutely critical to enabling the future, as is AI. But when it comes to AI, I think an innovative firm can only succeed with AI if it's thought very carefully about this sort of, as I say, this sort of blend or border or blurring between the man and the machine, to make sure that the decisions are clearly made, or that efforts are being taken to remove usually unintended biases.
Andrew, how do you think that big data and AI will affect the world of the next year?
Okay, I'm going to take that question in a different direction.
Okay.
So yeah, we talk, and as you know, on my podcast, we've gone super deep on startup ecosystems and emerging and frontier markets. And most of the conversations we're having, and most of the people I bring on, are doing something in either fintech or AI. The problem with giving someone in extreme poverty financials, access to a mobile device and a mobile wallet, the problem is they're still in extreme poverty. Now they just have this mobile device. So one specific area that I think doesn't get that much attention, that we all should be talking about much more, is 3D printing. Because once we're able to get the construction of a home down to somewhat close to zero marginal cost, that is something that can bring abundance in the material world to people in extreme poverty. And there are some startups that are working on that technology, probably not as much as would be ideal, but I think when you think about what can automation and AI actually do for us, I think it needs to be beyond financial services for sure. But we need to be thinking about, when it comes to food, when it comes to housing, when it comes to kind of the physical world, how can we bridge and enter a zero marginal cost society to bring physical abundance outside of just software? That's something that's super crucial for 2020s, because the technology is finally here. If you look at Icon, is one 3D printing company. There's another one out in Spain, blanking on the name. They're based in Malaga. But yeah, so those technologies are things that I think are the most important things that we all need to be talking about, that we're not.
Yeah, maybe if I can add something as well. So I do, believe AI, of course, has been, a trend, and I think from an operational excellence point of view, right? I mean, in the company, you can of course introduce automation, AI in production, supply chain, like these kind of things. This is of course also what we're trying to do at Roche, right? To really, automate our processes, less, maybe less manual work. Across all the different functions. But then, of course, with the customer, when it comes to the customer or new services that are relying on AI, I think the customer needs to also be willing to take up these services, right? So if I speak about oncologists or doctors, I mean, there needs to be a reason why they want to buy these services, right? So we have the capabilities to do this, but there needs to be an appetite. So I think maybe through COVID-19, there's maybe a higher appetite or maybe a higher push also in healthcare to take this up. But of course, again, it's also a change for the consumers or for the customers to actually get used to that, right? So I guess that's maybe the caveat, right? I mean, we have this technology, but of course, is the uptake by the customer really there? And for example, in healthcare, it has been very difficult until now, but maybe because of COVID-19, there will be an easier way to actually have AI type of, for example, clinical decision-making support, right? So we help physicians to take decisions on data, on healthcare data. Until now, this was very difficult. So we have already a product on the market since a few years, but it was difficult to get the customers buying into this. But maybe because due to the COVID-19, there will be a higher uptake of that.
Do you, just back to you, Alain, do you see, I mean, how do you see entrepreneurs developing in the health space because of COVID? So where should they be innovating, and where do you see that innovation going in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so again, I think the clinical trial space, so everything from remote virtual clinical trials, patient reported outcomes, collecting data from patients, making it easier for patients and physicians to actually collect that data. I think that's really critical. Of course, everything with regards to, for example, in supply chain, we are innovating a lot, right? And also in the production space, using sensors, fully automated production systems. You can track the product in each hospital, like how much medication is in X hospital. Do we need to reship new medications? So all of that is quite an interesting field. And I would also maybe say within everything that's related to supporting physicians in the clinical decision-making support, genomic analysis, data interpretation, because there's so much huge amount of data. If you think about genomics or all the data that the physician has to deal with, there needs to be data interpretation, right? So helping them to make better clinical decisions, that will be a big part. And of course, the telehealth, right? Telehealth, the way we are connecting between physician, hospital, and the patient. These are the three things, right? So telehealth, clinical trials, and also supply chain and production automation.
Okay, cool. In terms of, so I'll bring the questions back outside of health tech for a second, and just to ask you all how you see the future of global ecosystems, in the sense of, do you envision one global ecosystem, or do you envision pockets of the internet, just like the one we see in China, where there's different versions of the internet for each geopolitical region? And I'll start that off with you, Sami.
Thanks, Joshua. Yeah, I think this, whatever one thinks of, the sort of long-term impact of the pandemic, there is combination of the pandemic and politics is forcing some sort of a retrenchment from globalization. It's not to say that globalization is over, because I don't think that can, I don't think that clock can be wound back that far. But certainly you're seeing, we are going to see much more regionalization, and back to Alain's sort of mentioning of supply chains. Supply chains have pivoted in most regions of the world because of this. It may not be something that it may be that those supply chains sort of pivot back, but in many cases, most countries are thinking of manufacturing at a manufacturing or supply chain at a kind of nation first level. and then they're thinking about the region. Brexit and European Union aside, we are now in a sort of a world where we've got blocks. We're going to see much more kind of regional interactivity. We'll have an Asia bloc, a Europe bloc, potentially Middle East, Africa, depending on how fast Africa moves with its free trade agreement, and of course, and Americas, which increasingly will look, I suspect will start to look more pro Latin America integration than it will north and south. So yeah, I think we are going to see an increasing need for strong hubs in particular regions. But I don't, it's anyone's guess really, because we're still in the middle of all of this. But I don't really think that globalization is over. It's just we're going to see a much more nuanced form of it. And I think a layer on top of this is that technology now, the success of it will really depend on all of our ability to make a diverse, climate friendly industry or climate friendly world. There's 4 white guys here talking about technology, but actually what technology has got to do, and the startup world and the ecosystems and regulators have got to do is make sure that the technology companies start to look a lot more like the real world. More women, more diverse in general, and of course, look at the look at the relationship between technology and climate change and sustainability and sustainable development goals, and those will also play into this regionalization, because clearly globalization was pushed to its very limits by the beginning of last year, and it's not the way that the economy was running was clearly not sustainable. So I think that's where the ecosystems will start to play a very kind of important role.
Are you, Andrew? Do you think globalization isn't over and we're going to see a more nuanced version? What do you think?
Yeah, nuance is probably the right word to describe where we're going. I mean, the good thing about this past decade is we've just brought so much of the world out of extreme poverty that we have a lot more minds just like online now to solve problems. I'm not too I actually have, I guess, a contrarian view to climate change. I think it's like, I think we're going to solve it, over the next decade or so. I think technology, we've hit that kind of part of the exponent where this decade is going to be really, really interesting. When it comes to how COVID has changed things and will change things, I just think we're all just going to be more spread out. I've been, living in Washington, D.C. for 5 years, and, COVID hit, the whole city shut down. It was a ghost town, boarded up, can't have meetings, can't do events. So now I'm in the mountains, and I don't plan on leaving anytime soon. I love it here. I have a hot tub. I have fast Wi-Fi. There's no reason for me not to be here. And so I think we're going to start to see more of that. I've found specifically with working with a leadership team or A players, doing this over Zoom is actually more productive. It's a little bit harder to manage large distributed teams, especially when everyone's in different time zones. But I've actually had a much more productivity with myself and my small team ever since COVID started. I think localism is probably a good thing in certain areas of the supply chain, especially when it comes to food. I think we all should be focused on growing and supporting local farmers. Your food's gonna be much fresher, probably more nutrients than getting it shipped over from halfway across the world. So I think there are specific aspects of the supply chain where it's actually super good that there's trends in localism. And I think that once the vaccine starts getting rolled out, it's just going to start getting somewhat back to normal, but we're going to find ways of living, that we discovered during quarantine, not doing so many meetings in person, is going to just be a more efficient way of working and living. So yeah, I'm pretty positive about where we're going this next decade.
Bring that over to you, Alain, especially with Andrew mentioning the vaccine at the end there as well. How do you think that will affect how startup ecosystems recover from COVID and and how we continue to grow from there.
Yeah, no, I think getting back to the new normal, right, or to a more like stable situation. I agree with what Simon and Andrew was saying as well, right? I believe in this more regional model. I also think there will be more focus on sustainable development goals and you know, creating a sustainable society, etc. I think people maybe will be focusing after the crisis on themselves first, right? At a local level, at a country level, because what has happened in our country, how can we rebuild healthcare, education, all, you know, the whole economy at the local level. So they will be probably focused for maybe a few years on themselves. But that said, I think you can also not stop what has happened, right? So what has happened is like we explored this whole, you know, virtual working, connecting with people all, you know, all across the world. So there will be, of course, in parallel, even if countries are focusing on themselves, like people like we are doing now, connecting across borders, thinking about, you know, innovations, investments. And I think one of the things I hope is going to change in the next decade is that we really get also like somehow global currency, right? Like this, you know, if, you know, Bitcoin or blockchain will be really there, that you can also do easily investments across borders without losing money. So it becomes really accessible for the normal population as well. So not only for the, you know, super rich that can do this, but really like for normal people to, you know, make investments in different countries using such a Bitcoin technology. So that is really hopeful. But I guess we, in the first few years, will be more focused, at the national level, at every country is trying to solve their own issues. But definitely the vaccine, I think it will help to get things back to normal. Of course, it will take some time, right? I mean, I guess at least for the next 1.5, 2 years, we will be still living in a situation. Sometimes you have to be, you know, in lockdown. I mean, people need to be revaccinated, because it's not that you are vaccinated once and then it's over, right? You need to have maybe once per year or even twice per year. So I think I think it will definitely take 1.5, 2 years before we're completely out of the whole COVID lockdown situation. And then, of course, again, maybe focus internally on the countries first, and then in parallel, there will be, of course, some exciting things happening around innovation and entrepreneurship. But definitely, it will not be an easy time, I think, right? But there will also be some, I think, new ecosystems arising, right? Like global ecosystems or regional ecosystems. I think they will arise, and I mean, you can do it all virtual, right? I mean, I believe, I mean, we work fully virtual every day, and I mean, this is also saving money, right? For companies, for systems. I mean, you don't have to travel every time for a meeting, or so I think there's a huge benefit, of course, you know, for society, right? I mean, less pollution, less travel, but also for yourself. You don't lose time in, you know, going to a meeting for 2 hours and then going back, and right. So I think there's a lot of benefit of this. So yeah, the new normal, it's gonna come. It's already here, right? It's already forming, but I think it will be exciting. I'm also with Andrew and Simon. I think it will be a really exciting time, and we definitely will see some big changes in society.
I have a question.
The positive thing is you can
healthcare.
Go ahead, Simon.
Sorry, Andrew. You know, I mean, the challenge with the whole vaccine thing is, you know, once again, you know, the rich world has sort of has had the money to spend on vaccines. And of course, you know, that's all well and good if people stay at home, but in reality, everybody wants to go out and start traveling again. So, you know, do you think, you know, within healthcare, within big pharmaceutical, I mean, there is going to be a shift, isn't there? I would say, you know, what the repercussions of this, you know, ideally, we're going to see something like a new Marshall Plan, where, you know, healthcare, quality of life, it takes sort of center stage, and ideally countries to start to work together to enable that. Where do you think that leaves sort of healthcare and healthcare innovation? And do you think there's going to be more kind of nationalization of healthcare provision or healthcare innovation or pharmaceutical activity?
Well, it's a very big question, right? I mean, I do believe, of course, I mean, the vaccine, it will be, you know, part of the answer, but there will be also maybe other medications coming, right? That are maybe dampening the effects, you know, of COVID. So really people that are sick that, you know, that can be helped with some treatment. So yeah, I mean, to your question, right? You're saying like if we're going to focus more on the national level with healthcare or with pharmaceutical.
Well, I'm just thinking, what is the role in you know, what do you think the role should be or will be of big, you know, big pharmaceuticals and private healthcare companies in driving better healthcare globally. Because at the moment we do have this unfortunate system where a handful of big pharma has created the vaccine. Quite rightly, they want to make money out of that. They've sold to the highest bidder, but that doesn't actually solve the problem, because people still want to move around. And it's all very well if Israel and the UK and the US or Western Europe as a whole have got access to the vaccine, but then that still means that much of the world hasn't possibly or won't for some time. And therefore, the kind of the resumption of kind of normal activity isn't possible. And I wonder if there's if you feel that there's sort of likely to be some sort of Marshall Plan at the level of healthcare.
Yeah, I think probably like the local governments, they will force these companies that invented these drugs to also give maybe free some of their patents, right, so that it can be produced by others and in multiple countries. But it's also not possible for one company. I mean, for example, we are working with Moderna, right? So we support them with the production and development, but like one company cannot produce for the whole world, right? So in the end, they need to let go, some of these, I guess, exclusivity or, right? So I think you will be forced even by countries, if you want to gain access to their country, that you maybe have to let go of certain of, some of these things, right? So I think, yeah, there will be a force, I guess, from the political side to actually make it accessible for everybody, right? Because it's of course not possible that one company holds all that information and knowledge and other countries cannot get access to it. So I think it's there will be a push, WHO or even from local governments to actually do that. And I think it's good, right? I mean, we also have a responsibility, right? I mean, of course, as a pharmaceutical industry, we make money, of course, out of health, etc. But in such a crisis, you also need to give back, right? So I remember in the beginning of the crisis, there were some countries that needed, for example, diagnostic testing, and so we also shipped, diagnostic tests to some countries. Even they couldn't pay for everything, right? So there has been, of course, some, I would say, social responsibility of the industry, and I think this is needed, right? I mean, we're in a crisis, so I think it's not a business as usual.
We're going to start the next panel shortly, but before we do, Andrew, I'd love to hear your comments on that as well, just before we finish.
Sorry, comments on what?
The previous question, you were going to speak previously just about in regards to COVID and the effects it's going to have.
Oh, well, I think I already answered that. But before, I was just going to tell a joke right after I was, but like, okay. The timing's off now, so we're
okay, fair enough. Maybe the joke won't work now. Okay. Exactly. Okay, no worries, guys. Well, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting panel. Thank you for your attendance today, and all the best. Speak to you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.